For years, one document connected to Prince Philip remained beyond public reach, locked behind a legal seal powerful enough to silence questions and bury uncomfortable family truths. Then, without warning, that protection collapsed. A court ordered the Forbidden Testament opened, and within minutes, Camilla discovered that Philip had left behind something far more dangerous than money. He had left instructions. Instructions concerning the monarchy, its private inheritance, and most explosively of all, her place within it. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla did not move when the confirmation arrived. She was seated beside Charles when a private secretary entered with the court notice and placed the newly released pages in front of them. The supplementary testament, an additional legal document attached to a will that can add or clarify final wishes, had now been formally unsealed, giving named beneficiaries and legal representatives access to instructions that had remained restricted for years. That mattered because these were not abstract palace records. They governed Philip's personal possessions, private family papers, ceremonial keepsakes, and pieces of his legacy that carried emotional weight far beyond their material value. The Queen Consort began reading slowly, then stopped midway through the second page. Anne and Catherine were named as custodians of several deeply personal family holdings, while no automatic authority passed to Camilla simply because she stood beside the sovereign. Charles watched her face change as the meaning settled in. She looked up and asked, "How long have they known?" The king did not answer immediately. That silence cut deeper than any legal phrase because she understood the position he was trapped in. Defending her too aggressively could look like a son trying to overturn his father's final wishes. Camilla kept reading, and the next notation changed the temperature of the room. A documented legal entry showed that years earlier, pressure had been applied to keep the testament under the strongest available confidentiality. She recognized that history at once because she had supported the most restrictive handling of the material, believing permanent privacy would prevent exactly this kind of family rupture. Now the protection was gone, and the document she had once wanted buried was speaking for itself. Charles finally reached for the pages, but another clause stopped him. Philip had written that the instructions were to remain binding regardless of later changes in rank, marriage, or sovereign household. The sovereign household, the official working structure surrounding the reigning monarch, could therefore not simply absorb these private possessions after Charles became king. The wording was devastatingly deliberate. Philip had anticipated elevation, succession, and resistance. Camilla closed the folder and slid it toward Charles. Her fingers trembled as she removed her glasses. She did not raise her voice. "Your father made certain I could never outrank this." The king stared at the document while she looked away, but the most painful passage had still not been read aloud. Deeper inside, Philip had explained why he believed these boundaries were necessary, and when that reasoning finally surfaced, the battle would stop being about inheritance entirely. It would become a judgment about trust. The document does not simply distribute possessions. It rearranges emotional territory. Every name inside carries history, loyalty, and wounds accumulated over decades. Anne sees duty. Catherine sees responsibility. William sees a warning left for the future. Charles sees his father judging decisions the king has spent years defending. But for Camilla, the message feels unmistakably personal. Philip had prepared for a monarchy beyond his lifetime, and in that monarchy, he had deliberately placed limits around her. Anne felt the weight first. She received her copy privately and read the same clause twice before lowering the pages. The Princess Royal, the traditional title given to the monarch's eldest daughter, had always shared a disciplined bond with her father, and Philip trusted her deeply to protect what he considered family duty from personal pressure. That history mattered now because accepting his instructions placed her opposite Camilla, not as a rival, but as the daughter asked to carry out his last wishes. Catherine felt exposed for a different reason. She told William she had never asked to be placed inside an argument involving his grandfather and the Queen Consort. The prince reminded her that Philip had come to trust her, precisely because she rarely chased influence. William's future constitutional burden, the responsibility he will one day carry as sovereign, had also shaped Philip's thinking, and Catherine understood that refusing the role could look like rejecting the trust behind it. Camilla read the attached handwritten instruction and went quiet. Philip directed Anne to ensure certain possessions passed according to service, stewardship, and continuity, not proximity to the throne. The distinction cut sharply because these were private belongings, not crown property. Crown property means assets held for the monarchy or nation rather than personally owned by an individual royal. Her rank beside Charles therefore gave her prestige, but no automatic authority over what Philip had owned himself. Charles could not ignore the fracture. He went to see Anne without aids and placed the document between them. The king asked whether she intended to enforce every line as written. His sister closed the folder, looked directly at him, and answered, "I intend to respect our father." She sounded neither victorious nor angry, and that restraint made the answer harder to challenge. Charles left with more certainty about the law and less certainty about his father. Camilla had heard the wording. Catherine had accepted the burden. William had recognized the warning. Anne had chosen duty. But none of them yet understood what had made Philip write such defensive language in the first place. The answer lay years earlier, in one private confrontation that transformed suspicion into a permanent instruction. Every explosive document has a moment that created it. For Philip, that moment did not come during a state ceremony or constitutional crisis. It happened behind closed doors, during an argument almost no one outside the family understood. One request concerning his private legacy changed everything. Camilla believed she was discussing continuity. Philip heard something else entirely, an attempt to blur the line between the sovereign's household and possessions that belonged to his family alone. After that conversation, he acted. Philip had always drawn that boundary sharply. His private letters, military keepsakes, family records, and personally owned objects were different from property attached to royal office, and he wanted the distinction protected after his death. The sovereign household, the staff and working structure supporting the reigning monarch, could change with each reign, but personal inheritance did not automatically move with it. That difference mattered more as Charles assumed heavier responsibilities during Queen Elizabeth II's later years, and Camilla became increasingly involved in discussions about how their future household might operate. Camilla entered one private Windsor meeting, believing she was proposing order, not control. According to a later documented account prepared for the estate file, she suggested that Philip's private archive and several ceremonial keepsakes might eventually be administered through Charles's future household for continuity. Philip rejected the idea immediately. He asked whether she meant his son should inherit responsibility for them, or whether she believed the future queen consort would also gain authority simply by standing beside the future king. Camilla insisted she was talking about organization. His suspicion only deepened. Charles tried to soften the exchange, but his father refused to let the distinction blur. The future monarch explained that no disrespect had been intended, and that Camilla was thinking about practical arrangements. Philip cut across him. Marriage, he argued, could not transform private inheritance into sovereign property. The room fell quiet because Charles understood what had just happened. A logistical conversation had become a question of trust. Philip acted within weeks. A recorded instruction to his solicitor led to a supplementary testament, an additional legal document used to clarify or extend the wishes in an existing will, naming specific custodians and preventing his personal holdings from being absorbed automatically into a future royal household. After his death, Camilla supported the strongest confidentiality available around those arrangements, fearing that disclosure would turn the old confrontation into a permanent judgment on her motives. Philip had already made that judgment harder to escape. At the end of the Windsor meeting, he stood, gathered his papers himself, and looked directly at Camilla. Some doors belonged to the family before they belonged to the crown. Years later, those doors were still closed, and now Camilla wanted Charles to force one open. The legal arguments can wait. Behind palace doors, the crisis becomes brutally simple. Camilla does not care who drafted the clause or which solicitor witnessed it. She wants to know whether Charles will fight for her. For years, she endured public hostility because she believed the man beside her would never leave her exposed again. Now a judgment from his dead father has reached directly into their marriage, and the king's silence begins to feel like an answer. Camilla wants action, not sympathy. She presses Charles to order the palace legal team to examine whether Philip's supplementary instructions can be narrowed, reinterpreted, or challenged on administrative grounds. The sovereign, the reigning monarch who carries constitutional authority on behalf of the crown, understands the danger immediately. If he intervenes too aggressively, a private inheritance dispute could become something far more damaging. A king, appearing to use royal power to defeat his own father's personal wishes. Camilla refuses to let him hide behind procedure. Alone with Charles, she asks whether he truly believes Philip's restrictions were fair. The king chooses every word carefully and tells her fairness is not the same thing as legal validity. She stares at him. For years, she reminds him, she stood beside him through scandal, public hostility, waiting, and humiliation because she believed their marriage meant they would never abandon each other when pressure came. Then her restraint finally breaks. Are you his son right now, or my husband? Charles goes still. A documented private account of the conversation records that he then admits something he had never told her. Philip once warned him directly not to merge private family possessions with the authority of his future sovereign household. The sovereign household means the official staff and working structure supporting the monarch, not everything personally owned by the royal family. Charles had known his father's concern existed long before the Forbidden Testament was opened. Camilla's anger changes instantly. Humiliation becomes betrayal. She asks why he never told her. Charles says he believed the warning had died with the argument, and that repeating it would only deepen old wounds. She hears something else. He knew Philip distrusted the boundary around her influence, and he allowed her to discover that truth from a legal document years later. Charles reaches across the table, but Camilla pulls her hand away. She stands and pushes the chair backward. Neither raises a voice. That small movement carries everything they cannot say. Yet the king still cannot settle the matter himself. Because the power now sits with people Camilla cannot command, and one of them is Anne. A crown can open extraordinary doors. This is not one of them. Charles may be king, but Philip's private testament was designed precisely to survive changes in royal rank. The distinction is devastating because it means the most powerful man inside the monarchy cannot simply rescue his wife without crossing a boundary his father deliberately reinforced. And as lawyers explain where authority actually sits, Camilla watches one comforting assumption after another disappear. Charles listens without interrupting as counsel explains the limit. Philip's personally owned papers, keepsakes, and possessions fall under his estate instructions, meaning the legal directions governing what happens to property after death. They do not become subject to the monarch's constitutional authority simply because his son now wears the crown. That matters because sovereign power controls public duties and state functions, not a father's private inheritance. Camilla sits beside him and slowly realizes that rank cannot solve this. Anne holds more practical control than either of them expected. She and designated trustees are responsible for carrying out the disputed provisions, while Catherine's role is narrower, limited to stewardship of specific family objects rather than control over the entire estate. Charles asks whether he can request reconsideration. Counsel tells him he can ask as a son, but not command as sovereign without turning a private family matter into an abuse of royal authority. Camilla says nothing. She removes her hand from the arm of Charles's chair and folds it into her lap. The queen consort had spent years believing her position beside the king would finally protect her from being treated as temporary or secondary. Here, it offers no automatic force at all. Charles keeps reading, and the next clause strips away another possibility. Philip had anticipated accession, the formal moment when an heir becomes monarch, and wrote that no later elevation of a beneficiary or spouse should alter distribution. The wording is brutally clear. Becoming king cannot expand Charles's rights over the estate. Becoming queen consort cannot expand Camilla's either. Charles turns to Anne in private. He asks whether she would consider stepping aside from certain custodial responsibilities so the structure could be adjusted. His sister studies him for several seconds before answering. Philip had also left her a personal instruction not to surrender those duties under family pressure. "You are asking me to protect your marriage by disobeying our father." Charles does not argue. He withdraws the request. Camilla receives the answer shortly afterward, and something shifts. The question is no longer whether the document can be challenged. It is what happens now that everyone knows it cannot. And one closed door is about to become several. The first consequence is almost invisible. No proclamation is issued. No title disappears. Camilla remains beside the king, yet within the private machinery of the family, subtle changes begin. A briefing is redirected. A legacy meeting proceeds without her. An object she assumed would pass through Charles's household is placed under Anne's custodianship instead. Nothing appears dramatic from outside the palace. Inside it, however, Camilla understands exactly what is happening. Philip's final boundary has become operational. Trustees begin separating the Duke's designated possessions and archival material from everything administered through the sovereign household. Trustees are the people legally responsible for carrying out instructions attached to an estate and protecting the property placed under their control. That distinction matters, because once those objects are separated, Charles's position as monarch cannot pull them back into his working household. Catherine is also given a narrow custodial responsibility over several family pieces intended for future generations, a role she accepts reluctantly because she knows every decision now carries emotional consequences. Camilla feels the change before anyone explains it fully. Her secretary quietly informs her that she will no longer attend a scheduled briefing concerning Philip's private family archive because the matter falls outside the queen consort's responsibilities. She asks whether Charles will be present. The answer is yes. She says nothing more. Later, the king finds her alone with a cup of tea left untouched beside her. She tells him she spent years fighting to belong, only to discover that his father had prepared for a future in which belonging still came with locked doors. William sees the problem differently. In a private conversation with Catherine, the prince says ignoring Philip's testament would teach the next generation a dangerous lesson, that family wishes remain sacred only until someone powerful finds them inconvenient. She understands his reasoning, but she also tells him that enforcement has consequences beyond law. He agrees. Neither of them mistakes Camilla's humiliation for victory. Camilla begins connecting the names anyway. Anne controls one part. Catherine safeguards another. William openly supports enforcement. To the queen consort, they no longer feel like separate individuals carrying separate duties. They begin to resemble a wall Philip deliberately built around the future monarchy. Then the boundary becomes impossible to ignore. Camilla approaches a scheduled family meeting and is quietly stopped at the doorway. The agenda, she is told, concerns Philip's personal estate. She freezes, nods once, and turns away without entering. William sees her leave, and instead of feeling vindicated, the future king follows. For the first time since the document was opened, someone is about to cross the divide, not to challenge Philip's wishes, but to ask what those wishes are doing to the woman left outside. Power has failed to solve the crisis. Legal arguments have hardened it. Family loyalty has deepened it. The turning point arrives only when two people stop speaking through institutions entirely. William asks Camilla to meet privately. No Charles, no Anne, no advisors, no papers between them. Their relationship has never been simple, and neither pretends otherwise. But what happens in that room changes the emotional meaning of Philip's testament, because William makes a distinction Camilla desperately needs to hear. William enters with his position unchanged. The prince still believes Philip's instructions must stand, because succession integrity, the principle that future monarchs should respect established boundaries rather than reshape private family decisions for personal convenience, matters beyond this one dispute. If Charles can bend a private testament today, William knows someone could use the same logic tomorrow. Camilla expects that argument. She expects judgment too. What she does not expect is sympathy. Camilla listens as he tells her he understands why exclusion feels cruel after decades spent trying to earn a place beside Charles. William chooses the words carefully because he knows her history has been shaped by public hostility, suspicion, and constant tests of belonging. She looks at him and says people have spent years telling her she belongs, only to discover another room where that promise suddenly stops. The queen consort does not sound angry now. She sounds tired. William lets the silence sit. Then Camilla admits what the dispute has really done to her. The possessions were never the deepest wound. Philip's judgment was. She cannot stop thinking about the possibility that he died believing she needed boundaries placed around her, as though trust itself required a lock. The prince answers that the testament separated categories of inheritance from royal authority. It did not declare her illegitimate within Charles's marriage, his reign, or the family life they built together. Camilla finally hears the distinction. She tells William she will no longer ask Charles to challenge the testament and will withdraw any attempt to reinterpret Philip's restrictions. The decision costs her something, but for the first time, it feels chosen rather than imposed. He nods, not triumphantly, but with relief. William moves to leave, and Camilla stops him. "Did Catherine know you were coming?" He says no. A tired smile appears. Then perhaps this was actually a family conversation. The palace conflict has changed shape. Inside, the voices are lowering. Outside, they are about to explode. Because news of the unsealed testament has reached the public, and one brutal front page is about to turn Philip's private warning into a national argument over Camilla's place in royal history. By sunrise, the dispute no longer belongs to the palace. What began as a sealed family instruction becomes a national spectacle, and the story divides opinion almost instantly. Some see Philip's testament as proof that he never fully trusted Camilla. Others see something less personal, an old man protecting private inheritance from the enormous gravitational pull of the crown. Then one newspaper reduces the entire crisis to 6 brutal words. And suddenly sympathy begins shifting in unexpected directions. Charles feels the pressure immediately. Commentators argue over whether Philip's restrictions were aimed directly at Camilla, or whether they reflected his lifelong insistence on separating private family property from royal office. The crown, the continuing institution of monarchy rather than the private property of any one royal, becomes central to that debate, because the entire dispute turns on where public authority ends and personal ownership begins. The king decides not to fight every interpretation. Instead, he authorizes a restrained palace statement confirming that his father's personal wishes will be respected in full. Camilla reads the coverage in silence. One column describes her as an outsider who tried to reach into an inheritance that never belonged to her. Another questions whether Philip ever fully accepted the queen consort's place within the family. The words reopen wounds she thought she had survived years ago. Charles wants staff to challenge the harshest framing, but she stops him. Attacking his father's intentions to defend her, she says, would make the criticism look justified. Then the story becomes unavoidable. The fictional London Chronicle publishes a front page carrying Philip's image beside the headline, "His Last Order, Leave It Alone." Copies spread through Windsor as people gather near the castle gates, arguing over whether the Duke's decision was protection or punishment. Broadcasters repeat the phrase throughout the morning, but the tone begins to change when they focus on one fact. Camilla has chosen not to contest the testament. Anne ends the speculation almost completely. During an unrelated public engagement, a reporter asks whether Philip's final wishes will be honored. The Princess Royal pauses and answers, "Yes, completely." Her response is brief, but its meaning is unmistakable. There will be no family reversal. Camilla watches the clip beside Charles. She switches the television off before the commentary begins and looks at him. That is the end of it. The king does not argue. For the first time, neither of them is trying to win. One final family meeting remains. Not to decide who defeated whom, but to confront what Philip actually protected, and what his last command forced every one of them to understand. In the end, nobody loses a title. Nobody leaves the monarchy. Charles remains king. Camilla remains beside him. William still prepares for the future. Catherine accepts a responsibility she never sought. And Anne carries out the instructions of the father she refused to overrule. Yet something fundamental has changed. Philip's forbidden testament has forced the family to confront a distinction royal life constantly threatens to erase. The difference between power and ownership, between position and trust, between marrying into a crown and inheriting a family's memory. Anne accepts the final arrangement without hesitation, while Catherine quietly takes responsibility for the pieces entrusted to her. Charles formally declines any further intervention, ending the last possibility of a royal challenge. The Supplementary Testament, an additional legal document that expands or clarifies instructions attached to a will, now stands exactly as Philip intended. Palace advisors also draw a firmer line between private family inheritance and property connected to the reigning sovereign's household, making sure the same confusion cannot easily return. Charles feels the cost most sharply when the final meeting ends. Alone with Camilla, the king admits he should have warned her years earlier that Philip had doubts about where private inheritance should stop and future royal authority should begin. She answers with painful calm. His father's restrictions wounded her, but his silence wounded her more. The queen consort had believed she was confronting a judgment from the dead. Now she understands she was also confronting years of avoidance from the man beside her. Camilla finally admits why she wanted the testament kept hidden. She was afraid. Another royal judgment, once exposed, could define her publicly before she had any chance to explain herself. But keeping the document buried had only given that fear greater power. Philip's instructions were never meant to decide whether she deserved marriage, rank, love, or acceptance. They decided something narrower and more personal. Who would safeguard the private pieces of his history after he was gone? Charles understands the difference at last. Respecting his father's limits does not require choosing Philip over his wife. It means refusing to use one relationship to erase the other. The king can remain loyal to Camilla without rewriting his father's final wishes, and she can remain beside him without claiming authority over a legacy that was never hers to control. Charles reaches for the testament one final time. Camilla stops him. She closes the folder herself and places it between them. Leave it. There is no anger now. Philip's will does not destroy Camilla's place in the monarchy. It defines its boundary. She remains queen consort because of the life she built with Charles, but rank cannot rewrite private ownership after death. The crisis ends with one uncomfortable truth finally accepted. Monarchy may determine succession, ceremony, and public duty, but even inside a palace, some final wishes belong only to the person who made them. Philip's voice could no longer command the room, but his final boundary did, and for once, the crown chose not to cross it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.